happens... Oh, I guess I do need this mic. They put us in wireless mics, but nothing's happening with wireless mics, so I'm stuck at this podium. This is bliss for me. This is the first time this has ever happened. I'm here with my wife and my son. It's pretty cool. Pretty excellent. And Tabby and I have another son who writes and another one who's a minister, so we got the waterfront covered. We got the whole deal. I think, based on the introduction, the general introduction, this may be the entire audience of The Wire here in this room, you guys and me. Do you watch The Wire? Did you watch The Wire when it was on? It's a good show. I can't believe what happened to Omar. I'm still mad about that. I know the guy who wrote that episode, Dennis Lehane, and I sent him an email and I said, yeah, I can't believe that you killed Omar in a convenience store. But them's the breaks, I guess, on the streets of Baltimore. I do this because I like it. I have fun. I like to write, and I want the people who read what I write to like it, and it's not any kind of a bigger deal than that. My idea is if people see a book with my name on it, they should say, oh God, a free vacation, because that's what my mother felt like when she read the Agatha Christie books that she read when I was a kid. And so I want people to like what I do. I want people to have fun with it, and most of all, I want people to be involved. I want people to think about the story when they're away from it. I want to get back to it and read it some more. I want them to be late for appointments because they want to read a few more pages. I want them to not make dinner. I want them to have a good time. That's what it's about for me. It's about fun, and that's what reading is about for me. That's what I love about it, is that it's fun. When I read Owen's meerkat story, I just rolled. I thought it was terrific. And when Tabby showed me the first few chapters of Candles Burning, I was just blissed out. I'm going to read you something. It's not going to be real long. It's a new thing. It's from a novel that I'm writing now. And I'm actually going to read you the first day's work on this novel that was put down on paper last November. And in a way, it was written in one day, but I waited 25 years to write it, because I tried this once before when I was a lot younger, and the project was just too big for me, and I let it go. I let it slide. But it was a terrific idea, and it never entirely left my mind. You know, it just kind of stayed there and hung out, and every now and then it would say, write me. So finally I did. And it's going to be a very, very long novel, but I'm going to read you a very, very teeny-weeny section. But this is actually the beginning of the book. The novel is called Under the Dome, and the first section is called The Airplane and the Woodchuck. 1. From 2,000 feet up, where Claudette Sanders was taking a flying lesson, the town of Chester's Mill gleamed in the morning sun like something freshly made and just set down. Cars trundled along Main Street, flashing up winks of sun. The tower of the First Congo Church looked sharp enough to pierce the unblemished sky. The sun raced along the surface of Presteel Stream as the Seneca 5 overflew it, both plain and water, cutting the town on the same diagonal course. Chuck, I think I see 2 boys on Town Bridge, fishing. The delight in her own voice made her laugh. She had taken the flying lessons, mostly to spite her husband, who was the town's first selectman. In fact, she might be flying over his head right now. That was the town hall below them. But at first, she hadn't enjoyed the experience. At first, she'd been terrified. The terror had receded to something more manageable in recent weeks, but today, now, was the first time she'd really understood what made flying great, what made flying cool. Chuck Thompson, her instructor, touched the control yoke gently, then pointed at the instrument panel. I'm sure, he said, but keep the shiny side up, Claudie, okay? Sorry. Not at all. He'd been teaching people to do this for years, and he liked students like Claudette Sanders, and not just because she was easy on the eyes. He liked the fraidy cats who were able to get over their fear. Not all of them could, but Claudie was going to be just fine. She might cost Andy Sanders some real money before long. She loved the Seneca and had expressed a desire to have one just like it, only new. That would run somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million. Chuck also liked days like this: unlimited visibility, no wind, perfect teaching conditions. Nevertheless, the Piper rocked slightly as she overcorrected. "You're losing your happy thoughts. Don't do that. Come to 120. Let's go out Route 119 and drop on down to 900. She did, the Seneca's trim once more perfect. Chuck relaxed. She was a natural, and she was finally figuring this out. They passed above Jim Rennie's used cars, and then the town and Presteel Stream were behind them. There were fields on either side of 119 and trees burning with color. The Seneca's cruciform shadow fled up the blacktop, one wing darkly brushing over an ant-man with a pack on his back. The ant-man looked up and waved. Chuck waved back, although he knew the guy couldn't see him. "Beautiful damn day," Claudia exclaimed. Chuck laughed. Their lives had another 40 seconds to run. 2. The woodchuck came bumbling along the shoulder of Route 119, headed in the direction of Chester's Mill, although the town was still 1.5 miles away, and even Jim Rennie's used cars was only a series of twinkling sun flashes arranged in rows at the place where the highway curved to the left. The Chuck had planned, so far as woodchucks can be said to plan anything, to head back into the woods long before he got that far. But for now, the shoulder of the road was fine. He was an old fellow, and he'd come farther from his burrow than he meant to, but the sun had been warm on his back, and the smells were crisp in his nose, forming rudimentary images, not quite pictures, in his brain. He stopped and rose on his back paws for an instant. His eyes weren't as good as they used to be, but they were good enough to make out a human up there, walking in his direction on the other side of the road. He'd go a little further anyway, the Chuck decided, although not as far as he had intended. Humans sometimes left good things to eat behind them. He would get a little closer to this one and then go into the grass and watch him go by. Yes, that is what he would do. The Chuck was fat. He had raided many garbage cans in his time, both town and country, and he knew the way to Chester's Mill landfill as well as he knew the 3 tunnels of his own burrow. Always good things to eat at the dump. He waddled, a complacent old fellow's waddle, watching the human walking on the other side of the road. The man stopped. The woodchuck realized he had been spotted. To his right and just ahead was a fallen birch. He would go under there and wait for the human to go by. Then he would investigate the human's back trail for any tasty. The Chuck got that far in his thoughts, and another 3 waddling steps, although he had been cut in 2. Then he fell apart on the edge of the road. Blood squirted and pumped. Guts tumbled into the dirt. His rear legs kicked rapidly twice, then stopped. His last thought, before the darkness that comes to us all, Chucks and humans alike, was, what happened? 3. All the needles on the control panel dropped dead. "What the hell?" Claudia Sanders said. She turned to Chuck. Her eyes were wide, but there was no panic in them, only bewilderment. There was no time for panic. Chuck never saw the control panel. He saw the Seneca's nose crumple toward him. Then he saw both propellers disintegrate. There was no time to see more, no time for anything. The Seneca exploded over Route 119 and rained fire on the countryside. It also rained body parts. A smoking forearm, Claudette's, landed with a thump near the neatly divided woodchuck. It was October 21st. So that's... Oh, thanks. See, I'm a total child about this. The only thing that I really want is for you to want to know what happens next. So that's where I'm coming from, and that's what I like about it. And that's what I hope that you'll like about it, and for me, that's the joy of what we do. So I'm sure you have some questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we are going to start with the Q&A session for students. We have Jessica Neely over here to my right and Tina Poole over to my left with microphones. So please feel free to walk to either one of them to ask whatever you would like. Somebody's got to do it first.
Hello. Hello, my name is Clifford Ford. I'm from Cardozo Senior High School, and I had a question for Stephen King. I wanted to know why most of your writings were very gruesome and bloody, and there's a lot of violence and people dying and everything. I wondered why you would really put that in there. What possessed you to do that?
Why my writings are so gruesome and bloody? I have no idea. I know that I grew up, in some ways I'm a product of what I read and what I watched when I was a kid. I grew up reading a lot of horror comics. I'm down with where Owen's coming from with his anthology, Who Can Save Us Now, because I love Superman, I love Batman, I love the superheroes, but what I really liked were things like Tales from the Crypt, and monsters that were coming back from the dead, and movies like Night of the Living Dead and things like that. And they really scared me, and I would have to sleep with a light on in the closet, and I would think, well, maybe I can scare somebody else. I mean, it was just an impulse. You know what? I think we're drawn to things that are inside us. I think there are people who love romance stories, and there are people who love historical things, who love the past. This is what I was drawn to, and so this is what I do.
Hello. Hello, I'm Tiquanda Sledge from Idea Public Charlie Military Academy. And I wanted to ask for Ms. King, why do you believe that you were choosing in particular to complete Candles Burning?
I'm sorry.
Why do you believe that you was choosing in particular to complete Candles Burning?
Why was I chosen?
Yes.
Well, the state, Michael's estate owed the publisher money, so they wanted to finish the manuscript to try to get their money back. And I know for a fact that I was chosen through the intervention of some people that I know who were talking about this with an agent and said, hey, you know who could do this? She knew Michael, and she might be interested in the project, and so it came to my door, and as I said before, given that I wasn't going to have to argue with my collaborator, I thought that was a great deal. And I think it's a case of I was the first person they asked, and I said yes, and so they didn't have to go look for anybody else. But they would have been looking for someone who was compatible with Michael's worldview, I guess, or close to it. It wasn't a particularly cheap deal. I did all right out of it, but so it wasn't a case of they hired, you know, the unemployed, but that's about as much as I know about it.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Maldonado. I'm with Cardozo High School, and I'm Mr. O'Leary's AP Literature class. I brought my It DVD because it's my favorite movie, and I looked you up online, and a lot of my fears are in this movie, and I realized that you have many, many fears. Fear for someone else, fear of others' paranoia, fear for death, fear of insects, especially spiders, flies, and beetles, fear of clothes in places, fear of rats, fear of snakes, fear of deformity, fear of squishy things, and fear of the dark.
Yeah, it's pretty much global. Yeah, it's.
There's a lot of that in It. Did you lose? Because I know the clown. The way I see it is the clown is like a figure of like my fear. Like I pictured in the clown, and I know that everybody has their own fear, and I guess that clown was just like the thing of what you fear of. Did you use like a lot of your fears in this movie to like
Yeah, I tried to think of the things that frightened me when I was a kid, and clowns were one of the things that frightened me when I was a child. And, you know, it's amazing to me how many young people will come up to me and say, you know, I really saw that movie, it really scared me, you know. They see it pretty much runs on Sci-Fi Channel all the time, along with Rose Red and Storm of the Century. And when I was a kid, one of the things that always interested me is parents would bring their kids down in the front row to see the clowns. And the kids are like, ah, make it go away. It's got a scary face. It's got a, you know, it's deformed. It doesn't look, and the clown is trying to be funny and everything, and it just looks like death on a cracker. So I thought to myself, you know, clowns are really scary. So, and besides, clowns are never who they seem. And I can't remember, Tabby, was that before or after John Wayne Gacy? Who was a serial killer? It was after.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about him too. He had killed a number of children, and he liked to dress up as a clown. And I thought, ooh, that's really scary.
Yeah.
But it was a book about fear, and so I wanted to explore as many fears as I could.
Hi. Okay, hello. I'm Ann Ashmore Hudson, and I'm one of the adults who's excited to be here. I'm actually chair of the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities. And my question has to do with just the process of writing, and I'd really like to hear, really from all of you, when you get into a character, when you sort of go into that space, for me it's almost like a little rabbit hole. I'm afraid I can't get back up. So my question to you is, how do you do that? How do you get back out once you've created a character and you're there with them? How do you come back?
It's not like acting. It's not like, you know, I guess actors have a lot of problems with dropping the character when they go home, or many of them do. But I know of a story about a writer who couldn't get away from the character that he had created, which Steve wrote. But I never found any difficulty walking away from the character or opening my eyes. When I write, time passes and I don't know about it. I'm in a kind of a trance state. And I'm sort of in that world. But, I mean, I'm fully present. Otherwise, I may not be aware of the passage of time, but, you know, if the phone rings, I'm going to hear it, and if the house is on fire, I'll know. Well, I might not notice that, but actually, I have no sense of smell, and consequently, until the smoke gets really thick, I don't notice that anything is burning, but that's what fire alarms are for. But in any case, no, the character and the world that you created in writing isn't that encompassing, I don't think. That's my general feeling about it.
I think for me, I work so hard to write the piece and it takes so long that by the time I'm done, I can't wait to see the backside of all the characters. I mean, I think
common phenomenon.
You know, sometimes you get a really cool voice, and it's a little sad because you know that you used that voice, and now you've got to do something different, and that was really easy because you figured out how to do it. But I don't know if that's the character exactly, especially because I write in third person most of the time. It's just sort of a groove you get into, but when it's over, you got to let it go, and so it's kind of sad, but it's also kind of a relief.
The bad guy in the book, the chief, the head bad guy, the head villain in the piece, well, the book that how am I going to put this? In Under the Dome, of which I just read you the first 4 pages, is a guy named Jim Rennie. He runs the car dealership. So he's Big Jim in the book. He's Big Jim Rennie. And he's also one of the town selectmen. And the head selectman is the husband of the lady who dies in the plane. That's Andy Sanders. And what I was thinking when I did this, is you've got the first selectman who's kind of this weak, lame brain guy, and you have the second selectman who's really sort of a sleazy but a very powerful guy who sort of manipulates the first selectman, and I thought, it's just like Bush and Cheney. You know, you've got, and so I decided I was going to play at that if I could, and see if I could make that little dynamic work throughout the course of the book. But also, and this is how, for me, character develops from real life. When Owen was in high school, Owen played basketball, and I'm not going to mention the coach's name, but the coach was a very religious guy, a very fundamentalist religious guy, and he wouldn't swear, and we listened to Owen tell all the stories. And instead of saying, "You sons of bitches have got to run," this guy would say, "You cotton pickers have got to pick it up." And I thought, what a great detail. I'm going to put that in this story, you know, because it just fits for that character. So character develops that way. There's a guy down here in the front row who's holding a book of mine called Dolores Claiborne. And in that book, Dolores Claiborne, the characters sprang out of a lot of stories that my mother told and things that I saw when I was a little kid, because she took care of her own mother, who was old and getting senile and very domineering, and so kind of developed that into the thing. But
you know, I bet you anything that, you know, when you're writing about those two characters and Under the Dome, you know, you were inspired by something real, but as soon as they hit the page, they don't owe anything to the real people anymore, you know. And I think that's something to keep in mind when you write a story. You're going to think to yourself, oh, this character's, you know, sort of subconsciously a character come out, and you'll realize, oh, that's just like that, you know, that friend of mine. But once you start writing about them, you no longer have to worry about them behaving as your friend would behave, because now they're yours on the page, and you don't owe anything to anybody real, because that's nonfiction, not fiction.
And people don't recognize themselves in that anyway, because they're not. Now, was there a point where Callie Dakin stopped being Michael's Callie and became yours?
Oh, page 1.
Page 1.
As soon as I accepted the job, you know, I owned every character in the story, and I killed people off, and I eliminated characters, and I did anything I wanted with them because they were mine then. And if I was going to tell the story and tell it in the most strong way that I could, the strongest way that I could, I had to map it out. It had to follow a certain, if you will, riverbed. And so anything that would be distracting from the central part of the story that couldn't serve the story, I would get rid of. But it's something that Steve said in in the gunslinger stories. Everybody has to serve the beam. He also says you have to serve the story, and that's what you make the decisions on, about who goes and who stays, and what they do is they've got to serve the story. And there's another saying, kill your darlings. That may mean that you created a character that you just think is so cute, so adorable, so incredible, so amazing. And they say this clever, but they don't work for the story, and so out they go. I think most novelists, I don't know about short story writers so much because that's short form, but when you write the long form, there's always a point in the composition of the book when you're saying to yourself, I am so sick of these people. I'm putting them on a bus and rolling it off a cliff. And so you do reach a point of you want to bring the story to an end.
I literally did that in The Stand. I got to a point where I felt like I couldn't go on. I didn't understand. There were so many characters, they proliferated. And for a while, I had about 3 weeks where I couldn't write anymore. I was stuck. And I just... I went for long walks and thought about it and thought about it and thought about it. And I got to the point where I thought to myself, I can't finish this book. I've got 450 pages of this novel, and I'm not going to be able to... And then one day on one walk, just what Tabby said, I thought to myself, why don't you blow most of them up? Worked like a charm.
That particular manuscript was like this high. I dropped it down a flight of stairs.
Yeah.
And he made me pick it up and put it back in order. All right, thank you. Any other questions? Sir?
My name is Obina, and I'm from McKinley Tech. My question for you is, what is your intention for your readers? What do you intend for your consumers to take away from your art? What's the moral of your stories?
I don't have one. I write for me, and that may explain something about the trajectory of my career, which has been fairly low. I don't know how to write for anybody but myself. I don't know, I couldn't sit there and plot something out and say, boy, this is going to hit that market and they're going to love it. And unfortunately, there's an awful lot of books that are written that way, fiction that's written that way now, to a kind of formula, you know, you got it. There's a way you write a screenplay for TV. You have to do certain things within the first few minutes, and then you have to reach a certain crescendo here, and you have to have an incident there. You ever watch, who were those guys? The EMTs. What were their names? Of course, you'd never watch this unless it was on old TV.
Oh, yeah. Emergency.
Emergency. Is that on some TV now?
I don't even know what that is.
There's so much recycled. You don't know what people know anymore, but there's so much recycled stuff that you encounter. But
well, it's been recycled as ER. You know right. ER, right?
But in the 60s, 70s, there was this series called Emergency, where these two guys who were emergency technicians would go out and save people. And you could see that formula every single week. There was a jokey time in the story, and then they went and rescued somebody, and there was another jokey time in the story, and then they went and rescued somebody again. And this went on for about a half an hour of these ups and downs. I believe that Baywatch is also written that way, with these kind of, you know, little episodic things that must be accomplished within a certain number of minutes. I don't know how to do that stuff, and I can't imagine it would be the least bit challenging. So I don't. As far as teaching people, giving them a moral, I don't think I've ever written anything that the substantial message isn't change is constant. If you think that things are just the way they are, they're going to stay that way, you're living in a dream, because everything changes. Everything changes, and our inability to accept that change and ride with it is what creates most of our problems as human beings. We want what we want, and so we scheme and we manipulate and we, do all kinds of other amazingly stupid things, and everything changes anyway. So I don't know if that really sufficiently. One of the things that Steve talks about frequently also is that when you set out to give people a message, you really run a risk of preaching. And that is not the essential job of the fiction writer. That's your minister's job.
Mm-hmm. My wife is a novelist, and she said something to me once that struck me as being incredibly true, which is that it's very difficult to go from, writing entirely for yourself in your own little space and making up stories that no one ever sees, and then once you've published something, then people have expectations, and you realize that once you let something go, it's not yours anymore. So I think for me, I certainly don't write with a moral in mind. I mean, I want to write things that feel authentic and feel really good and true, and I do it for myself, and then when I'm done with it, if I think it's extremely original and extremely good, then I'll try to publish it, but then that, like the other 92%, has got to stay in the computer where it can't harm anyone, me especially. So I think I write the stories for fun and to amuse myself, and then they go forward if I think they might amuse other people, but they have to be pretty funny to do that.
No, I still do idolize Frank Norris, the novelist who wrote McTeague and the Grain Belt novels. And he said, somebody asked him about criticism of his work, and he said, what do I care if they criticize my work? I told the truth. And for me, that's the important thing. You tell the truth that you know in your own life that's based on your own experience. And if you lie about it and you gussy it up and make it nice, it's no longer the truth, and then it becomes immoral. And for me, the truth is that most people are good, most people try hard. Good does not always succeed, and when it does succeed, it's with a terrible effort, and people usually get hurt in the process. But that's life.
Hello, my name is Ashley Hearns. I'm from Tabitha, and my question is for Owen King. What kind
Owen Queen.
What kind of impact on your writing has being the son of two great writers had on your writings?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that I think one thing that a lot of writers really struggle with is the idea that writing can be a job. And I was very lucky. I was incredibly lucky in many, many ways because not only were my parents writers, my parents had a lot of money, and I didn't have to worry about a lot of stuff. But in terms of the profession, you know, my parents worked every day like it was a regular job, and they were successful at it to a certain extent, and to a great extent. And so when I went to graduate school and was trying to improve my craft and to write publishable things, it didn't seem like quite as much of a leap of faith for me as I think it does for some people, because I'd seen it done and I knew it was possible. I mean, I think that it also gave me some false impressions about how easy it was to get people to read stuff. But it definitely made me feel like I could do the job, and I think that's the biggest thing that I drew from my parents, and also a love of stories and reading things, and reading a great variety of things and writing a great variety of things. I was very lucky that way.
I was very mean to him in high school, because when he showed me something he'd written, I'd tear it all apart.
See, I wasn't in high school. I was actually like 7, and
well.
You know,
my own feeling is...
It was a story about my trucks, you know. And so she red inked it. I mean, I think that's... There's a certain amount of... Many of you may come from happy families, and that's... that will be a hindrance to developing as a writer. It's... In a lot of ways, the other thing my parents gave me was an extraordinary amount of mental abuse, and that sort of... You know, that made me, I knew that I had to get some of that down on paper. So,
yeah, it's so
if those of you that do come from happy families now, if you can sort of ask your parents to be, you know, behave towards you in unconscionable ways, that may help you develop.
Well, let's get this
quickly.
straight. He was my third baby, and he about killed me. Right?
Right.
And I've told him this all his life, that, you know, that I never had another kid after that. That ought to tell you something right there. But,
you know, I think reading is the big thing. You know, when I was a kid, I read a lot because my parents had books everywhere.
To them. And by the way, there isn't anything you can do better for your own children than to read to them right from the beginning. Right from the time that you bring them home from the hospital is you read to them. And what happens when you do that is this becomes the contact between you and your child every day, every night when they go to bed. Best reading, which is so important to intellectual development, with this connection between you and the child. And so they begin to have very warm feelings about that storytelling. And of course, they're getting the storytelling, which is also very, very important. But you cannot do anything better for your child, ever, than to read to them. And they will come to you after a while, and they'll bring their books. and they'll want you to read the same damn thing over and over again. When they're really little, you have to read Goodnight Bunny about 1 billion times.
You know,
but you can add to the stories. You can corrupt them, and fool or make the kid get fooled.
One of the best things you can do for yourself is to read. And what Tabby says about being read to is very, very important. Somebody asked me how I got into the whole gruesome thing and the horror stories and everything. When I was 8 or 9, my mom took me on her lap and read me Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
He did have a difficult upbringing.
Well, what I remembered was that at one point, when Jekyll is in his Mr. Hyde form, he walks over a little girl, and then he enjoys her screams so much that he turns around and walks over her again. And the guy says you could hear the bones snapping inside her body. And I thought, oh, that's terrible. I want to write something just like it. But look, now listen to me. What amazes me about this reading thing is reading, like anything else, becomes rewarding the more that you do it. It isn't something that becomes rewarding the first time. I'm stunned by how many people will, if I ask them if they've ever seen a movie based on my work, they'll raise their hands. If I say books, it's not as much. And the same people who understand that in physical endeavors like sports, anything like that, there's no gain without pain. They'll go and they'll hit the gym and they'll work out and do this and do the crunches and yell at each other. You feel the burn. Yeah, I Charlie horsed up. The same people say, I don't want to read a book. That's so hard. If you do it an hour a day, it becomes something that's not only enjoyable, it becomes addictive, it becomes a part of your personality. And it's the readers in the world who become the writers. You cannot write unless you read. And the readers in the world, regardless of how much or how little writing talent they have, become the people who succeed in life. Reading, I don't want to sound like an ad, a public service ad on TV, but the fact is that if you can read, you can walk into a job later on. If you don't, then you got the Army, Iraq, I don't know, something like that. It's not as bright, so that's my little commercial for that.
Let's take a question on the side from Tina.
Hi, Mr. King. My name is Naja Riles, and I'm here with McKinley Tech. In several of your books, you have characters or themes that kind of go from one book to the other, like you had the Crimson King in the Dark Tower series, and then Insomnia, and then in Dolores Claiborne and Gerald's Game, I think there was a thing with the fireworks that kind of went down. Do you already know that you're going to do that, or does it kind of just happen that these things are going to be in 2 or 3 different books?
For a long time, it seemed to me like a lot of the stories are interrelated, and that the Dark Tower stories are at the core of that. And I sort of like them when they come across so that different stories kind of overlap with each other, because then to me it feels like, like a big story. Dolores Claiborne is set during an eclipse that actually happened. It's a historical where there was a full eclipse across the state of Maine. But there's another story called Gerald's Game that happens also during that same eclipse. And I always wanted to write a third one where the women, Jessie Burlingame from Gerald's Game and Dolores from Dolores Claiborne, would kind of come together later and be able to relate to each other because of that eclipse. And it just has never happened yet. I don't try to force those things. So I kind of let the stories do what they want to do, and if they want to come together, I let them.
If you write as much as Steve does, it's all bound to get messed up together anyway.
Sure.
Sort of like he never really cleans out the cake tin. It's still got some batter from the last batch in it.
Well, of course, you've got a number of books set in the same town.
Yeah.
And I bet that was a case of you were writing one book and then you made up a side character that you thought was interesting. And
yeah, I did that.
You had to go back.
Tabby's got a town called Nodds Ridge, and all those people pop in and out of those books. And it's fun. It's like meeting old friends.
Yeah, yeah.
We have a question on my right.
Yeah, my name is Noel Nance from Cardozo, and I wanted a question for Owen King. I wanted to know, like, what age were you when you started reading your father's or your mother's books?
Pretty young. Pretty young. I mean, they're always around, and
You read Tommyknockers when you were just a kid.
And my parents would read their books to me,
Yeah.
you know? And so, gosh, I don't know. I was really young. I was like 7 or 8, probably.
And I wrote one book with my daughter in mind, our daughter Naomi, who's a lovely person, and she enjoyed all those books by Piers Anthony, was it? But they were like, they had like pixies and things, and
Dragons.
no, they did imps and fairies and things. And she said, "Dad, you know, I just don't like those to be scared." And I relate to that. She said, "Would you write something with dragons in it?" So I wrote a book called Eyes of the Dragon, and that was for Naomi.
Yeah. A lot of people have a prejudice against fiction because they say it's not true. But I used to be a library assistant. I was going to become a librarian. I got lost along the way. But in any case, I got to tell you, yeah, the difference between what people classify as fiction and nonfiction is there's more lies on the nonfiction side of the aisle. Anybody can publish a pack of lies and say that's the truth, you know, like somebody's memoirs, or just pick it, a book of economics. That's not any more real, and it's usually less real than what fiction can do. And what you can do with fiction is you can enter the lives of other people, and there's nothing that I can think of that's more important, because we're fundamentally isolated from each other. It's very difficult to enter. One of my favorite pictures in the world is a painting of these two people who are kissing, but they're wearing bags over their heads, basically. So they're kissing through fabric. And what that's about is the unknowability of each other. You know, you can be married to someone for 1,000 years, like Steve and I are. Have been married. And it, you know, it doesn't matter how many pyramids you've been buried under and all that kind of thing. There are still aspects of each other that are surprises that you know, and things you just can't know about that other person. The only way to engage with the other person is imagination. And so when we do that, when we read a story about a coal miner, or we read about a telepath, or a cop on the streets of, you know, you do the same thing with TV, a cop on the streets of Baltimore, you're entering into those lives and experiencing an empathy with the choices that people are forced to make and so on. So I hate to hear statistics like most men don't read fiction because they don't think it's real. It's far more real than, good fiction anyway, is far more real than anything
You
on
men
the other
out there,
side.
be an exception to the rule. Read stories, read fiction. To me, the great pleasure of fiction, you know, I mentioned The Wire before. You know, The Wire feels really real to me, even though I know it's fiction. And I could sum it up in one shot. You know, there was the series where they found all the winos in the deserted houses, the deserted row houses. And there's a scene where the camera's outside, okay, and the camera comes around, and here are all these press people, like this guy down here taking pictures, only they got the cameras and everything, and they're doing their stand-ups and talking to each other and the whole deal. You know, that's real. That's a real thing. You see that at any crime scene. Camera keeps going, it goes through, and you've got the yellow tape. We go past the yellow tape. Float past the yellow tape. We're inside the yellow tape. We go inside the door. There's McNulty and Bump inside, and the body's on the floor, and they're talking about the crime. And then, that's the magic to me. You're inside. I love that. You're inside the bag. You know, so that's cool. That's cool, and it's really cool, too.
Over to my left.
We should hurry up on our question.
My name is Michael Drayton from McKinley Tech, and I have a question for Mr. King. Did you think that your books would be like the standard for horror genres, horror books in general?
Did I think they'd what?
Be a standard for the genre?
No, I didn't have any idea. I still don't. I mean, I'm just having fun here.
Over to the right.
My name is Shanae Thompson from Idea Public Charter School, and I wanted to know from Ms. King, why were Janice and Judy chosen to do the dirty work?
Because they were manipulable.
Manipulable.
They were people without sufficient internal strength to resist the manipulations by the core of
killers, right? I guess so.
That sort of core group of evil women, Mrs. Mank and those two sisters and so on. They were people who could be cutouts in terms of a spy novel. You could say to them, go do this, and they'd do. Because it didn't take a lot of motivation for them to do it. There was something in them already spoiled, all ready to do this. So.
Why don't we do 2 or 3 more and then we'll call it a day? Is that good?
Over to the left.
I know we're fascinating, but there comes a point,
Hi, my name is Jasmine Duckett, and I'm from Cardozo Senior High School. Now, this question is for all 3 Kings. Do you get criticized a lot, and how do you take it?
Oh.
It's devastating.
I hate it. I hate it. I can get 12 reviews that say a book is good, and then one, I don't even want to say the word, but you know the word. One of them comes along and says, you did a bad thing, wrote a lousy book or something, and it's like failing a test or something. I don't like it.
Yeah, I think it's always pretty depressing. But it also kind of depends on the way it's kind of the way it's phrased in some ways. If the reviewer sort of essentially says, this was a noble endeavor that I didn't really connect with me, then that doesn't feel too badly. But when it sort of makes you feel like it was not such a noble endeavor, then that's a pretty bad feeling because you put years into the books.
It's human nature to remember criticism more easily than praise. That's just reality. It hurts more when you feel like they haven't done the job that they were asked to do as a reviewer. When somebody says right from the get-go, I don't like this kind of book. I've never liked this kind of book. I don't like this person. They're not a good person. Blah. That kind of review, the reviewer never should have been chosen. You need to have somebody who cares about the book. They don't necessarily have to like you personally, but if they've never read the kind of book that you write, they got no business, making the criticism of it.
Have to say one thing, though. If they're all saying the same thing, it's probably
you got a
wrong.
problem. Yeah.
But also, you never think that what you wrote was perfect.
Oh yeah, you know the imperfection of what you wrote
there's
better
something
than
that's
anybody.
not perfect about it, and it's so if you read a review, it's not such a big deal if it's a mostly good review, but then the reviewer says something like, but this one character really didn't buy this, and you can live with that. But it's when they say that it was a complete fiasco that you feel pretty poorly.
Don't buy this book. Don't drop it on your foot. That kind of criticism.
Right.
Yeah.
I have 2 more questions over here, and then we'll wrap things up.
My name is Katasha Haywood, and I'm a junior at Cardozo Senior High School. And my question is for all 3. Are any of your books based on dreams, nightmares, or even desires?
Nightmares? Was that it?
Are any of the books based on nightmares or dreams or fantasies, I guess? I'm not sure I should even get into this question. Dreams we all have dreams. And to me, they're always little novels. If you pay attention to your dreams, they'll become more and more coherent to you. They'll have more and more elaborate stories. If you talk to a novelist very often and you ask them about their dreams, they'll tell you these amazingly detailed things about their dreams. They're little novels, they're little stories. One of the things that human beings are compelled to do is to tell stories, and we tell them to ourselves. And so often, that dream is just yourself sending you like an email saying, hey, pay attention to the feelings that you're having. about what you're doing right now. You know, if you're having a dream that's full of anxiety, okay, you're doing something that's making you anxious in your life. But I think because I feel that's where the novel starts. The storytelling always starts within the human being and within the part of the mind that does dreams. We are all capable of dreaming, and we're all capable of telling stories. And that's the immediate connection with dreams to me. As to whether I have ever written down a dream, no, but I've heard some other people's dreams that should be written down. The novel is a sort of dreaming, waking dream as you write. You're using exactly, in my opinion, the same mental muscles that everybody has and they use in their dreams. What the novelist does, what the fiction writer does, is work those muscles all the time.
Yeah, Tabby was saying, and this is true, the thing about using that same muscle. I dream a lot more and a lot more vividly and unpleasantly when I'm not working. When I'm working, I think a lot of that stuff is getting vented on the page. But from time to time, I've had dreams that I've thrown into books because they fit. I can remember having a dream one time that I was in a junkyard where there were a lot of discarded refrigerators. And I went to one of these, and you know, they're supposed to have the hinges pulled and the latches pulled so little kids can't get in them and die in the fridges. But in this dream, there was a refrigerator and it was closed, and I went up to it and I opened it, and it was full of these bloodsuckers. They were all over the inside of the refrigerator, and they flew out and they started to light on my face and things and suck my blood. And I woke up and I was terrified, and I thought, geez, I'm going to put that in a book, and I did. I put it in it. So it was a very handy dream.
I think that I write really consciously. I see something, or I hear something, or I read something, and that inspires me to do something, and then I get in that subconscious place once I start. But I start from a really awake place, really no dreams involved.
One more.
I'm Shayla Thomas from Cardozo Senior High School, and I just wanted to know, like, have you ever wanted to, it's for all three of y'all, like, have you ever wanted to, tell, like, your mother or your father or your son or your wife or your husband or your son, like, that their book wasn't good and stuff, or like...
No, I mean, I don't think so, because I never felt that way, but also, I mean, it sort of comes back to reviewing too. One of the things I've never really, there's this famous Kurt Vonnegut quote where he says, something, just paraphrasing here, but something like, a bad book review is like putting on a suit of armor to attack a hot fudge sundae, I very rarely read anything that I think is bad in a particular way that I really want to tell the person, this was a really craven thing that you've created that I hate. I can't think of very, very few times when I think that. Even books that I don't like, I know generally that the writer tried their best. And so I have very, very rarely do I have any urge to tell anybody, let alone somebody in my family.
Mm-hmm. I think we've always approached it in a supportive way. If we see a flaw, we try to say in a good way, mm-hmm. Have you thought about doing this with this aspect of the story? Or very often we go to each other with problems in the story and we say, what do I do now? Or we talk a story out and somebody is listening, dad, brother, whatever, and they may say, well, that sounds all right, and that's all it amounts to. And other times, if it's me, I tell them what to do. Mm-hmm. But that's me.
She does,
yeah.
Too. No, I mean, I'm not good at critiquing. I've done book reviews myself. I'm asked sometimes to do them. And I remember I wrote a book with my friend Peter Straub called The Talisman. And we got a real bad review in a magazine by Joyce Carol Oates, another novelist whose work I respect. And I wrote her a letter. I was very angry. and said, you know, I can't believe that you said what you said about this book. I felt betrayed, hurt. She wrote me a letter back and she said, I never took a book review job in my life unless I expected to like that book. And I thought, that's a good attitude to have. And then I understood that she wanted to like the book and didn't. And I think that if you don't, you try to be as honest as you can and say that. When it's in your own family, I always saw myself, and I think Tabby would agree with this, we always saw ourselves as parents first, lovers first, husband first, wife first, so that anything that I ever said, I always said to myself, the first thing that comes here is love. And the first thing is to say to this person, you're doing a terrific job, and you're going to get better. And when you see the better work, then you see great work, which I've seen from my wife and both my sons, and my daughter too, our daughter too, that's something that's a terrific reward in itself. And it's more important than the books you write, is the fact when you can say to somebody, when you can give somebody an attaboy. I love that. That's the greatest thing. You've been great to sit there and listen to us, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.